So in my research, how I did this was a retrospective task review. It's a method or a technique that has been used in interpreting studies and translation studies before. So what happens is that the interpreter first interprets, and this is recorded. And then immediately after, the interpreter and myself would sit down and we would discuss how the interpretation went. So this is kind of a first debrief, a retrospection. And then we rewatched the whole recorded interpretation, which is a task review. So the interpreter could stop when they wanted and just comment on a specific fragment. So one of the participants called this a critical self-analysis of your own work. And it really is a self-analysis, but it is also an opportunity to stop and reflect and to address those questions of what they did, how they did it, and why they did it. So as I've said, this method has been used in other research in translation and interpreting before, and it is particularly useful when we want to understand the interpreting process. So the result is a PhD on linguistic interpreting strategies with a description of 11 strategies. And if you are interested in the research, you can go to my blog via this link where you can download a thesis, and you can also watch a 20-minute presentation I gave during my PhD defense. But this is not what I want to focus on today. Today, I actually want to focus on what the benefits are for interpreters, for professionals, and possibly for our whole profession. So for the interpreters in my research, it was an opportunity to actually stop and look at their own work, to reflect on it and to discuss it. And this kind of installed in me an awareness that most of the time we, and I do not want to generalize, but overall we as professionals do not stop. There are examples of how interpreters are trying to incorporate this more pause and reflect approach to their work. And some of these were mentioned in the WOSLI newsletter of January 2021. However, mostly we just keep going. We interpret every day, again and again, in different settings, with different demands, different expectations, and we keep going. And some of the participants in the research said, actually, this was great. We never get this opportunity to really look at our work, to really stop and reflect on it. So when COVID-19 arrived in our professional lives in March 2020, we also kept going. And we could ask ourselves, were we ready back in March 2020? No, we were not. Of course we were not. I don't think we could have been. I don't think anyone was ready. But the more important question is, are we ready now, July 2021? And I don't think so, because we have not stopped. We have not, like in my research, given ourselves the time to look back on how we are working in this changed climate, and to reflect and to strategize. So in order to be able to assess where we were pre-COVID and where we are now and where we are going, we need to stop. We need to look back, we need to reflect. And I think we can do this individually, but we can also do it collectively. We can, for instance, grab this conference as an opportunity to take stock and to strategize about how we want the profession to further evolve. And by we, I mean all of us, deaf people, all sign language interpreters, interpreting agencies, hearing interpreting service users, governments, institutions, regulating bodies. All of us need to reflect on what the situation is now and where we are going. And to do this, we also need research. And there already have been quite some publications and work being done on the impact of COVID-19 on the profession. I have listed some here, and also at the end of my PowerPoint, you will see the references. And there are, for instance, the 4 surveys conducted on the impact of COVID-19 on the sign language interpreting profession. And these surveys were also supported by WASLI, and I think a lot of the members participated in the surveys. The results of the first 3 surveys are already available in a report written by De Mulder, Pouillot, and Gebreurs. And the 4th survey is actually currently being analyzed. So I can say that the report on the first 3 surveys really holds a wealth of information that can inform our reflection. There is also work done on the impact of COVID-19 on working conditions for deaf people. And this was a blog published by Custers et al. On the academic platform. There's also a blog by Jemina Napier on the same academic platform on interpreters' working conditions during the pandemic. There has been research on anxiety and stress in ASL English interpreters during the pandemic by Schnuck. And also a very recent publication on techniques used by deaf interpreters while translating COVID-19 information in LSE, Lengua de Signos Español, by González Montesino. So these type of studies offer us one way to stop and to take stock of the current situation and the impact it has on our profession. But there is also a wealth of information to be found through reports and publications issued by organizations such as the WFD, WASLI, EUD, and national and regional associations. And I'm sure we will receive even more information during this conference. Now, some of the findings that research up to now have provided and that we should take into account moving forwards, and some of the things I want us today and tomorrow maybe reflect upon are the following. So from the perspective of the interpreters, from the survey conducted by De Mulder and al., it became clear that 60% of the respondents had never worked remotely pre-pandemic. And 63 of the respondents never had received training on how to work remotely or how to interpret remotely. Around 32% did take training while the pandemic was going on. There's been research showing us that there are issues of team interpreting when working remotely. There's research showing that there is increased stress of interpreting remotely. There's also observation that we are working alone more and more. However, the survey by De Mulder and al. Also showed us that 73% of the respondents said that they do plan to do more remote work in the future. Then for deaf people, they have faced also some problems regarding institutional policies surrounding which kind of online platforms can be used for their meetings, which actually resulted sometimes in the exclusion of deaf people in order to be able to participate. And then I think for all of us, whether we are interpreters or not, there is the issue of digital literacy. So how do these new technologies work and how does it make our work better? In some parts of the world, there's also the problem of access or even affordability of internet hardware, software, the whole setup. And then for all of us, it has been a real challenge to manage our personal life and professional life in just one space. I also think we've all come to understand that our 3D language, signed language, has turned into 2D on the flat screen. And I'm sure we all suffer from Zoom fatigue. So based on our own experiences and also the information provided by research and by reports, we should take some time to reflect and ask ourselves some of what I would call the hard questions. And I've listed some here, but there might be more. So some of the hard questions are, what did we do? So when it became clear that it was no longer possible for us to work as we had been working, how did we adapt? What changes took place? And then how did we do this? How did we set ourselves up for the new way of working? And was it successful? Did it actually work? And then in my opinion, a very important question we should be asking ourselves is why? Why did we do it? Which considerations led us to change the way we were used to work? Was it the question of demand? Was it financial considerations? Or maybe a feeling of duty? And I think it's also interesting to reflect on which decisions to do what we did were our own, which ones were reached maybe through collaboration, but also which ones were maybe enforced upon us by institutions. And when we consider the why, we should also consider what was our aim, what were we trying to achieve? And then when we look at the future, we could ask ourselves, would we do it again? And this is where we can start being strategic and consider which of the things we implemented and the things we changed actually helped us to achieve our aim and which did not. And then do we want to keep doing it? And here we are really talking about the future of sign language interpreting. Is it in everyone's best interest to evolve to a hybrid model of sign language interpreting? And maybe then do we need to be even more aware of when and where interpreting is appropriate? And then which type of interpreting is preferred? How do we go about that? And I refer to the blog Jemina Napier posted on Academic on working conditions for interpreters during the pandemic. And she also calls for a long-term thinking and sustainable solutions for all involved. And I really, really want to echo this. So I think once we have been able to reflect on how the profession and the communities have adapted to the challenges we faced, we can start to strategize. We can start to plan how we want to go forwards. How do we want to shape the future of our profession? And again, there are some questions we can consider collectively today, tomorrow, after the conference. And first of all, most importantly, is what do deaf people want going forward? And then there's also the question of the impact of technology on the profession. And one question I've been wondering about is, do the recent and the rapid changes take attention away from some of the issues the profession as a whole was trying to address? I'm thinking of issues of the fact that training of sign language interpreters is not in place globally. Certification is not a fact all over the world. We're still figuring out how to set up good models of monitoring, of supervision. Quality is still an issue. Trust was something we were trying to work on, and collaboration. Also, the development of deaf interpreters and translations, and the lack of diversity in our profession were all issues we were already trying to address. But you could say that the recent and the rapid changes actually added even more things for the profession to consider. And one of those is interpreting in crisis. How to go about that? How do you interpret in a crisis? And linked to that, I think there's the issue of how do you protect interpreters who are working in these kinds of conditions? But also, are interpreters prepared to do this kind of work. Maybe there's need for specific skill sets to be honed and to be encouraged. And I think we could also wonder whether interpreting is always the best way to provide crucial information. Or maybe we should consider collaborative models of providing crucial information in signed languages. So linked to that really is the question of what are the limits of interpretation? And also I think we should consider what the impact is of the visibility of signed languages via interpreters in the media. And then, of course, also the question of responsibility comes to mind. So I hope that answers to these questions will help us shape our profession for the future. And I think that it will help us that looking back over the years, maybe in 5 years, 10 years time, we can look back at this period and say that truly, yes, we actually have learned from 2020, 2021. And I'm sure that presentations today and tomorrow will also encourage us to do this. I'm really looking forward to watch these presentations and to reflect upon the issues they bring about and to learn with all of you. So I really would like to thank you, first of all, for attending, but also for taking the time to reflect on our profession. And as always, thank you for your dedication and support. Some of the references are here, and I'm happy to share them in the chat if that would be useful.
So just to say thank you very much, Dr. Heyerick, for a great start to our WASLI conference. We're delighted to have you at Keynote. I think we have some time for questions, just a short amount of time. So if you would like to ask a question in English, please type it in the chat. If you would like to ask a question in International Sign, please type IS in the chat, and we will then allow you to turn your video on. Do we have any questions from the participants? I'm delighted to say we have 266 at this moment. Any questions at all? So we have a question from South Africa. I'm going to read it because we also have spoken interpretation into Spanish, so this will allow that to occur. The question is, how can we, sign language interpreters, make sure that governments understand how important sign language interpreting services are for the deaf? Most governments view sign language interpreters as helpers, and maybe we need a strong definition of the notion of sign language interpreter so that people understand we're not a third person or a helper. So do you have any thoughts on that in light of the current situation, Dr. Heyerick?
Yes, well, thank you for that question from South Africa, and hello from Belgium, by the way. I think when we're dealing with governments, they look at interpreting as a service provision, So I think it's crucial to do this kind of negotiating, this kind of creating awareness of what the job of an interpreter really is, to do it with the people we're delivering the service for, deaf people. You really need, or maybe the deaf organizations really need to lead the way in these conversations so that the government will have a very clear understanding of why, in certain cases, interpreters are needed. And I think that's the best way going forward. Obviously, interpreters are there as allies to support these claims, to show that, yes, we can do what deaf people expect of us and what governments expect of us, but these expectations have to be realistic. So we can define all what we want, and we can create beautiful theoretical models, but the end is going to be a collaborative model where deaf people have a voice, interpreters can also add their perspectives, and then hopefully come to a joint, clear understanding of governments and regulating bodies, what it is we can do and what it is we cannot do. I hope that's an answer to the question.
Very comprehensive answer, I think. Thank you. We have people who have said that they have similar issues in their countries, and so thanking you for that question. One comment for the tech people in terms of Facebook Live, but we also have a comment from Venezuela, just saying thank you. Venezuela, Colombia, saying thank you very much. You've addressed many of the points that we need to reflect upon, and that they are undertaking research at the moment and seeking many of the answers to the questions that you pose. We have a question from the Philippines, from John, asking, how can interpreters from the global north and the global south support each other post-pandemic? Pre-pandemic, there has been a huge gap in terms of opportunities between those two regions, and the pandemic might have posed more challenges in the south. How do you think we might be able to address this gap and addressing it as a community?
Yes, I think a very important question and a very insightful observation. I do think that for many of us, the gaps that were already there, the inequalities that were already there, have been enlarged by the pandemic, absolutely. And as always, I think looking for ways to collaborate, try and set up projects between the global north and the global south, so we can actually learn from each other. And I don't think the learning direction, because this is kind of the theme of the conference, right? What have we learned? It's also what can we still learn from each other? And the learning direction isn't always from the north to the south. I think there can also be a lot learned from how the global south has addressed certain issues. And I've said in my presentation, there's sometimes the issue of affordability or access to simple things as internet. So obviously, if then everything has to go remote, there's an issue. And I know some interpreters in some parts of the world have actually put their own lives in danger to still go directly live interpreting because there was no other solution. So I think reach out to organizations in the global south, the global north, and see how you can, even if it's only a project of exchanging experiences, see what can come forward and maybe move forward from there. But I do agree that I think that it's put like a really microscopic lens on the issues we were already dealing with.
And so then we'll take, I think maybe the last question, just so that we have a time for a break before our next sessions. And we're going to show a little video after this question. But the question that I have is from Kaha in Indonesia. I hope I've pronounced that name correctly. My apologies if I haven't. The needs of sign language interpreters is high, but in certain countries, the number of interpreters is limited. So it might be difficult for interpreters to stop and take pause. I would like to know your comments about this situation. Thank you.
Yes, I agree. And is not only about demand and supply. Like if there's high demand and there's only few interpreters, there will be an enormous responsibility on the shoulders of the interpreters. But I really believe that it is a responsibility, and if you want to take on that responsibility and do it consciously and do it with like in good faith that you are providing the best of your service, we need to take pause sometimes. We need to be allowed to take a pause sometimes. So again, here it's collaboration with the people we're working with, really. If the demand is high, but there's not enough interpreters, something needs to change fundamentally. You can't expect the interpreters who are doing the work to just keep going. They will burn out. The quality will not meet up expectations. So in the end, deaf people are also not getting what they want. So fundamentally, you have to go back to the root of the problem. Training of interpreters, certification of interpreters, the payment of interpreters, probably the professional status, where are we at and how can we improve this so that there are more interpreters and everybody can take the much needed stop and pause every now and then so that we can keep on doing our work. I think in one of the newsletters it was said that we as interpreters are a tool, and if we break, there's not something that can replace us as a person, you know. So I think it's a tightrope and it's not easy, but if we are serious about our profession, we should give ourselves permission to do this, even in very difficult circumstances. Yeah.
And I think, as you raised in your presentation as well, sometimes it may be through thinking about alternative service provision as well. That may be one of the things. Well, I'd like to thank you once again, Dr. Heyerick, for giving an inspirational start to our conference. It's been wonderful to have you as our keynote to kick off this event. As has been mentioned, Zoom fatigue is something that many of us feel. So in the interest of having a break before we go to the next session,